From pop culture to politics, this is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day, another great week, in fact, in this greatest nation on God's green earth. And what a week it will be, leading up to the 250th birthday of the United States of America. So what are we celebrating when we celebrate this 250th birthday? There's a whole big piece about that with 16 different authors suggesting what we have to celebrate in the United States of America. We will get to that. That appeared in the New York Times. Meanwhile, a very, very big week for the Supreme Court of the United States. Big decisions announced today. And later this week, or perhaps even later today, the Supreme Court is going to rule on birthright citizenship, transgender athlete bans, and campaign finances. Major decisions expected on key issues that expected before the weekend and the 4th of July holiday coming up. Meanwhile, the New York Times today reporting, as everyone else is, the Supreme Court let the $5 million sex abuse verdict against the president stand. President Trump had asked the justices to intervene after a jury found that, yes, he had sexually abused and defamed the writer E. Jean Carroll. This is many years ago. But the court said, no, Trump was convicted. He was judged to have actually done the sexual assault and had also defamed E. Jean Carroll. So she is due to get at least $5 million, and she still has pending $83 million more, which Trump may be able to afford a little bit more easily because of a multi-million, some are saying multi-billion-dollar deal that he and his family have made with Kazakhstan, the former home of Borat. Remember the fictional character? We will see how all of that works out. There is also an AP poll that shows that, yes, America has grown less proud of its history or the way its democracy works. That particularly over the past decade, that according to a brand new Associated Press National Opinion Research Center poll, Americans' pride in the U.S. on several key attributes dropped sharply since 2017. What happened on 2017 to start this drop in pride in the United States? We will get to that on the Michael Medved Show. But also, the United States and Iran have once again agreed not to fire on each other, which is supposed to be one of the things that happens when you successfully end a war and make an agreement, a memorandum of understanding, as it is called. And we are also supposed to now reopen the Strait of Hormuz to ships and not fire on those ships while they are trying to sail away with cargoes full of oil, which, by the way, is getting to be more reasonably priced. That is a successful development for the Trump administration. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to ships, this is after fighting resumed over the weekend. The Iranians had attacked U.S. bases elsewhere, particularly in Bahrain, in Oman, in places around the Gulf of Hormuz and the Strait of Hormuz. And fighting has resumed less than 2 weeks after the two countries signed that memorandum of understanding to end the war. After an oil tanker was fired on in the Strait of Hormuz Thursday, an attack that the U.S. blames on Iran, and Iran has not taken credit for it, the U.S. military struck back at multiple targets in Iran on Friday and Saturday In response, Iran's military then launched strikes at the U.S. naval base in Bahrain and the Ali Al Salim air base in Kuwait. In further retaliation, no damage was reportedly done to U.S. facilities by the Sunday attacks. Neither the White House nor the Iranians has publicly confirmed the latest deal to halt hostilities, and talks are expected to continue this week. Meanwhile, Russian authorities in Crimea placed the peninsula under a state of emergency on Friday, just before the weekend, obviously, due to weeks of Ukrainian strikes that caused power outages and fuel shortages. Sevastopol, the largest city in Russian-controlled Crimea, has been experiencing blackouts for days. And the city's governor, Mikhail Razvozhayev, said Friday that restrictions on electricity supply in Sevastopol would continue. Last month, the Ukrainian military declared a logistics lockdown of Crimea, saying it planned to systemically destroy Russian logistics, equipment, and command posts in the region. In the week since the announcement, Ukrainian forces have targeted infrastructure, including roads and bridges, to detach the Crimean Peninsula from Russia and Russian-occupied territories in southern Ukraine. In other words, as we reported starting a week, even 2 weeks ago, the tide of battle appears to have shifted. And the fact that Russia and Putin are now on the defensive against a resurgent Ukraine is amazing. What else amazing? Texas is on the verge of requiring more than 5 million of its public school students to study Bible stories as the state emerges as a leader in the national conservative effort to infuse Christian teachings into American classrooms. The measure, which the Texas Board of Education is expected to approve today, would add Bible stories and verses as mandatory reading in the state's K-12 curriculum. And part of the argument in favor of those Bible verses and that biblical background is the Bible, Old and New Testaments, are such an important part of the culture that gave birth to this great country that it is important for people growing up and learning about our culture and learning about our country to have at least some exposure to what that biblical material means and what it has meant in the history of this country. We will be getting to that as well. We'll also be talking with a chief economic correspondent from Axios, Neil Irwin, about this strange situation where we have a good economy. We have markets seems to be up again today. The economy is surging. People's investments are doing well. Our gross domestic product is doing well. So why is it that people are so convinced that our economy is lousy and they complain about it? And to the other decline in pride as we approach this monumental 250th anniversary of the nation's birth. We do have a lot to be proud of, and what do a number of writers all across the political spectrum see as the most worthy subjects, the most worthy developments that we should be celebrating for the United States of America. We will be back with more on all of these developments and all of these decisions from the Supreme Court that we are waiting to cover. That and more coming up on the Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, there is another warning from President Trump that the United States may be, quote, forced to wipe out Iran once and for all. What does that mean? That means that they are talking again, but with a new intensity after the exchange of attacks over the weekend. Meanwhile, there are some issues being settled by the Supreme Court of the United States. One of them involves the ability of states, not the federal government, but states, to sanction mail-in ballots with fewer successes for the attempts of President Trump and his administration and many Republicans to oppose or limit mail-in ballots, and particularly mail-in ballots which may be postmarked before Election Day, but because of slow postal service or slow FedEx or whatever people use, may arrive a few days after the Election Day is officially over. Okay, first of all, the war and peace issue. President Trump said the United States carried out a counterattack against Iran on Saturday for violating the ceasefire deal yet again, as the president put it, which the president said threatened to wreck the ongoing negotiations to end the war. Trump said the U.S. could soon be forced, that's his word, to finish off Iran if more violations occur. The president said America will have no choice because Iran is showing it cannot be reasonable and will never learn. Trump posted on Truth Social, the United States aircraft just struck Iranian missile and drone storage locations and coastal radar sites for violating the ceasefire agreement. Again, all in capital letters with an exclamation point. It is very possible they will never learn. There may come a point when we are no longer able to be reasonable and will be forced to militarily complete the job we very successfully started. If that happens, the Islamic Republic of Iran will no longer exist. Signed, President DJT. His post came shortly after U.S. Central Command reported that the U.S. military hit multiple Iranian targets in direct response to continued Iranian aggression against commercial shipping. Iran was given a chance to honor the ceasefire agreement, but elected not to when its forces launched a one-way attack drone, the report said. And they note in the New York Times that Trump has made similar threats to annihilate Iran if it doesn't behave at other points in the war. Trump warned a whole civilization will die tonight if Iran did not open the Strait of Hormuz. A 2-week ceasefire deal was announced a few hours later, and Trump backed off his threat. He is not widely expected to keep the threat about wiping out Iran this time either. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court upholds late arriving mail-in ballot law. That ballot law where in Mississippi, the Supreme Court today announced that it was upholding Mississippi's grace period. The term grace period sounds nice and benign, but it's very controversial because it's a grace period for late arriving mail-in ballots, rejecting a strong push by the Trump administration to invalidate a state law. The ruling means that Mississippi's law, which allows elections officials to count ballots postmarked by Election Day and received up to 5 business days later, will remain in place, at least through the midterm elections. The vote was 5-4, with Chief Justice John G. Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who is one of the Trump appointees to the court, joining the court's 3 liberals in supporting the state law. The decision, writes the New York Times, is a blow to efforts by Republicans and Mr. Trump to roll back mail-in balloting, and will also have leave in place similar laws in at least 18 other states and territories, including 2026 battlegrounds in Nevada and California. It is also a defeat for President Trump, who has long criticized voting by mail, falsely claiming that the practice is open to fraud, and helped lead to his defeat in the 2020 presidential election. The state law at issue was adopted by Mississippi's Republican legislature during the pandemic, but the Republican National Committee and Mississippi State GOP later changed their minds, and they challenged the measure in court, arguing that federal law sets out Election Day as the day when ballots should be considered final. Well, it still is. What this means is if the ballot actually arrives after the day that it has been cast, and with the nature of mail, it's very possible that'll happen. Or if you happen to be in the military, or if you're abroad, to give a grace period that allows your ballot to be counted when everything else is in order, and when people know in advance what the deal is, that's basically something that the court said was reasonable. And much more, it made the point that in terms of regulating elections, as it says in the report on this case, much of the oral argument in March had focused on how Mississippi could show that a ballot had been officially cast by Election Day if it was received later. And several conservative justices had raised questions about the state's practice of allowing late arriving ballots to be counted, not only when they were postmarked by the U.S. Postal Service, but also when they were delivered by FedEx. The court's 3 liberal justices and Chief Justice Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett had pointed out that the Constitution directs states to set the election regulations, not the federal government. We'll be back for more on Supreme Court decisions and split decisions coming up on the Medved Show. And it wasn't all negative for President Trump and for the MAGA movement with the Supreme Court today. In fact, one of the most important decisions expanded the president's power to fire officials, a big win for the Trump administration's, overturning the nearly century-old precedent called Humphrey's executor. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in a dissent, said it promises only chaos. Okay, but what does it mean? What the case that was announced today means is that the president has a right to fire officials at federal agencies like the Federal Trade Commission or the FCC. What it does not have, however, is the right to fire people at the Federal Reserve. And why is that? It is because when you go back to the creation of the Federal Reserve back in 1913, the whole idea of the Federal Reserve Bank was that it was supposed to be independent of politics. It was not supposed to be controlled by the President of the United States. Even though he could appoint people to the Federal Reserve, he couldn't tell them how to decide the financial issues that they were called upon to decide, to try to keep the Federal Reserve Board as much separate from politics as possible. President Trump had been trying to immediately fire a Federal Reserve governor named Lisa Cook, further cementing the Fed's independence was a Supreme Court decision just handed down that said, no, Lisa Cook stays on the Federal Reserve. The president does not have the right to fire her. By the way, it's fascinating to actually read about Lisa Cook, whose background is fairly remarkable, and she was going to be fired by President Trump because of charges of violating income tax law by not reporting on the actual arrangement she had with two different homes that she owned. But Lisa Cook is one of those people who has just been an outstanding achiever her whole life. She came from a rural Black background. Both of her parents were very active in the church. Her father was a pastor. And she went to Spelman College in Atlanta. That is one of the outstanding traditional Black majority universities. And she won a Marshall Fellowship to Oxford University in Britain, and then got her PhD in economics from University of California, Berkeley. In any event, she stays on the Federal Reserve. And the entire effort by President Trump to purge her from the Federal Reserve because she wouldn't agree with him about lowering interest rates, that falls by the wayside. However, the court does hold that the president has a right to fire other officials for other agencies, which does overturn a century-old precedent and is an important victory for President Trump. Concerning this case in Mississippi, where the justices upheld a Mississippi rule that gave a grace period for mail-in ballots to come in. This is not just a Mississippi case, because there are 18 different states, including Mississippi, that have similar laws that would have been struck down if the case had gone the other way. The justices also upheld state law that counts mail ballots that arrive after Election Day. According to a summary of the case, an unexpected rebuff of Trump's longstanding attacks on mail-in voting. Trump immediately called for Congress to pass the SAVE Act. SAVE is supposed to stand for Safeguarding the Americans' Voting Eligibility, which actually doesn't safeguard voting eligibility. It makes it more difficult for people to vote. That SAVE Act would limit mail ballots and install strict new ID and proof of citizenship requirements for voting. What they are reporting about this is that during the oral arguments over the Mississippi law about the arrival of mail-in ballots, several justices raised questions about whether striking down Mississippi's law could open the way for broader legal challenges to election practices, including early voting and accommodations to provide for mail-in voting by military and Americans living overseas, all of which, particularly the early voting, are widely popular. The court also denied President Trump's appeal of the E. Jean Carroll verdict, one of the E. Jean Carroll verdicts, meaning he must pay $5 million to the former columnist, but there's another $83 million that he's ordered to pay. That one hasn't been challenged yet, but it will be. A justice has also denied Alan Dershowitz's defamation appeal against CNN. The Supreme Court refused today to revive a $300 million defamation lawsuit filed against CNN over its coverage of the prominent attorney's remarks made while he was defending President Donald Trump during his 2020 impeachment trial. The majority declined to take up the case in a brief unexplained order. Justices Neil Gorsuch and Clarence Thomas dissented, calling on the court to reconsider the legal standards for public figures who claim defamation. The Supreme Court, meanwhile, also rejected Trump's push to toss the $5 million verdict, E. Jean Carroll sexual abuse case. Concerning the Dershowitz case, the prominent attorney, longtime professor at Harvard Law School, a frequent guest on this show, by the way, Alan Dershowitz said the news network aired only a portion of the comment made during his defense of the president, distorting his meaning to make him look like he had lost his mind, according to court documents. Look, this is a difficult thing because there were a lot of people who wondered about Alan Dershowitz and his defending President Trump so consistently, given the fact that Dershowitz had been a long time, basically his whole life, Democrat, an enthusiastic Democrat. So that surprised people. Concerning the ruling about the president's firing ability, the Supreme Court expanded presidential power on Monday, reports the New York Times, by affirming President Trump's ability to fire most independent regulators, although the justices explicitly affirmed that the Federal Reserve's independence must stand and said its leaders could not be dismissed at the president's will or fancy. That was a 6-3 ruling, broadly to allow the firing of federal regulators, but not on the Federal Reserve. More on the impact of all of this and developments on the presidential campaign coming up for 2028, coming up on the Medved Show. On the Medved Show, there is a great deal of conversation about the leftward lurch, and that really is the right word to describe what is going on. It is not a movement, it is a lurch because it's sudden and it's somewhat instinctive, but it doesn't make a lot of sense or work to the advantage of the United States in any way or to the Democratic Party even in any way. I'm talking about the sudden shift to from labor unions, which used to be the backbone of the Democratic Party. David Brooks says from labor unions to universities. The comment by David Brooks, a generally conservative, but moderate conservative commentator, he talks about the sudden emergence of victorious candidates challenging longtime Democratic incumbents, two of them in New York, who were driven out of power by people who are members of the Democratic Socialists of America, who are in fact every bit as radical as you might think. Here is David Brooks commenting on what this means for the Democratic Party, clip 7.
There's somewhat of a realignment going on. The Democratic Party, heart and soul, used to be the labor movement. It used to be the unions. It's not anymore. The heart and soul of the Democratic Party is the universities, and especially the elite universities. And so the candidate who won in New York 13, Marie-Lise Avia-Chevalier, went to Columbia, was an activist in the Gaza protests. She is a sociology PhD, or I think she's trying to get her PhD, and she grows out of that place. And if you look at all the candidates, the DSA candidates, where they did well, they did very well in the more affluent, the whiter, and the better educated parts of New York City. And the traditional candidates did well in the poorer and more multiracial parts of New York City. And so the faculty lounge has become a strong part of the Democratic Party, and faculty lounge politics have become a strong part of the Democratic Party. And that, I think, extends somewhat beyond New York City. You have Democratic Socialist candidates in Washington, D.C., mayoral race. Around the country, you have other DSA candidates. I don't think it's going to totally reunite the party. There just aren't that many people with sociology doctorates and people who respond to this faculty lounge politics. But there are enough.
Enough to make trouble for the Democrats in their idea to move on from the MAGA movement and the domination of American politics for 10 years by Donald Trump. I had posed the question at the beginning of the show with the new polling from the National Opinion Research Center asking people leading up to the 4th of July holiday, are you proud or extremely proud about the United States and being part of this great, amazing country? And only 53% of Americans today, far less than were willing to make the statement 10 years ago. People have suddenly lost pride in the last 10 years over the United States, starting in 2017. What happened in 2017? Well, on January 20th of that year, there's a guy named Donald Trump who stood up there and took the oath of office and became president of the United States. And Trump has largely dominated our politics, certainly dominated the media coverage of our politics for the entire decade. There's no question about that. And suddenly you have people who, I mean, you look at the stuff that comes up every day, the claim today that he is going to, again, and this is about the 20th time he has made this threat, he is going to wipe out, destroy, obliterate, liquidate, erase from the history books any existence for the government of Iran unless they comply with his wishes. And he never does it. It's always taco. Trump always chickens out. In this case, it's probably a good thing that he is chickening out here rather than using nuclear weapons to liquidate Iran. Is that really on the table? In any event, since 2017, the politics has been so bitter, so polarized, so partisan that people are less proud of the country. And John Fetterman, a Democrat, elected Democrat to the United States Senate, even though he votes frequently on the side of President Trump, with President Trump, he talks about what is happening to his party, which is another ground, an entirely valid ground, it seems to me, for concern about the future of America. When you have some of these extreme supporters of Islamic terror, groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, which are supported by people who are being elected as Democrats to the Congress of the United States. And it's outrageous. And this is talked about and very clearly despised as a development by Senator John Fetterman, Democrat from Pennsylvania, appearing on Fox News. Clip 11.
Part of our party that's getting taken over with these extreme views, whether it's Pete Hustle in Maine or the new squad coming in out of New York City or the guy in Colorado. That's the direction that our party's going.
Okay, and what he's talking about in Colorado is the race between Phil Weiser, who is the state attorney general, who is very much on the left, running against a moderate Democrat, Michael Bennet, who is a U.S. senator and is in the midst of a very bitter struggle for the Democratic nomination. Senator Chris Murphy was on Meet the Press, and he, who is another Democrat, from the state of Connecticut had this to say about the state of the Democratic Party and the future of the House of Representatives. This is clip 17.
Voters aren't super happy with establishment Democrats or establishment Republicans these days. I will say, though, what binds together, I think, every Democratic candidate that is running, including the ones in New York, is that they are standing up to protect American democracy. And right now, the biggest threat to this country are not a handful of House candidates in New York. It is the President of the United States that is trying to destroy American democracy. And the Democratic Party, left, right, and center, is united around the fact that we need to protect this nation from Donald Trump's attacks on the rule of law.
Okay, the idea that even people who despise our economic system, who are open socialists, who want to expand the power of government, expanding the power of government into intruding into every aspect of American life to increase the power of government is also a threat to democracy. It is a threat to the popular control and ability to control key decisions. And the idea that you may criticize President Trump's policies or his personal conduct, his corruption. Meanwhile, they'll get to the idea of why is it that when we have some positive economic indicators, many positive economic indicators, why do so many people deny the existence of a good and solid economy? That and more coming up in This Greatest Nation on God's Green Earth.